The Pain Pod is produced by Bloodstream Media and is intended for informational and educational purposes only, and is made possible thanks to our sponsor, Tremeau Pharmaceuticals. Visit resethastudy.com to learn more about their work.
While I was in nursing school, we had a whole section on the cultural differences with which patients approach their care, how they deal with physical and emotional pain, death and dying. We as hospice nurses assist the patient in controlling discomfort, pain, that it allows the patient to spend their time doing the things that bring them joy, that bring meaning to their lives. That is what is meant by quality of life.
Quality of life. This is a phrase we hear a lot when it comes to illness and pain. But what exactly does it mean? Does taking away a person's physical pain improve their quality of life? Or is it more complex? This season, we have been exploring the sociologic components that make up pain, or more simply put, the social side of pain. By doing this, we learn that by looking at the overall pain experience, not just the physical and emotional, we can begin to fully understand and treat a person's pain. So when we talk about quality of life, should we be addressing more than just the biological components? In this episode, we dive deeper into this concept with former hospice nurse Pat Wisniewski, and we expand upon the palliative care techniques and comprehensive pain treatments used to improve a person's quality of life, even through the process of dying.
My name is Pat Wisniewski, and I am a retired trauma care and surgical ICU and hospice nurse.
Hospice care is a type of health care that is provided to sick or terminally ill patients. Doctors usually order hospice when care begins shifting away from curative treatments of a disease or illness and toward relief of symptoms, such as pain.
In my experience as a hospice nurse, at the end of life, patients may experience all sorts of discomforts: pain, shortness of breath, nausea, anxiety and constipation, swelling, insomnia. The list goes on almost interminably. A key goal of hospice care is to reduce these symptoms, increase the patient's comfort level as much as possible.
Pat Wisniewski gives a brief overview of the education and role of a hospice nurse.
When I started in nursing, I got the basic nursing education, but when I moved into the hospice arena, we also additionally were educated in thanatology, the study of death and dying, and palliative care, which is the reduction and management of symptoms of the patient.
As a patient, shifting from curative treatments to palliative care can be difficult. Managing physical pain is one thing, but coming to terms with death isn't so easy. Pat expands on how a hospice nurse takes care in approaching this sensitive topic.
Pain is frightening, and the fear of the unknown is almost always worse than what's known. Most patients do come with a fear of what is to come, and I often see the first pain is that pained expression on their face. So one of the first goals of a hospice first visit is to, as much as possible, give them an idea of what an average example of a decline and death is. Sometimes the family are looking at me like I'm crazy. Why are you talking about death? Because everyone's afraid of that four-letter word, DEAD. But our job as a hospice nurse is to maximize a patient's comfort and thus to manage their pain.
To provide comfort and manage pain, it's important to understand how to measure pain. And we talk more about this later in the episode. But for now, let's talk about measuring quality of life.
As a hospice nurse, we do look at quality of life. And basically, the ideal is this: if we as hospice nurses are able to assist the patient in controlling their discomfort, pain, and the symptoms such that it allows the patient to spend their time doing the things that bring them joy, such things as interacting with their family and friends, continuing the hobbies and activities that bring meaning to their lives. That is what is meant by quality of life. When I started hospice nursing, the cubicle in the office I moved into was empty except one little strip of paper on the edge of the bookshelf. And it said simply, "The more you live, the less you die." And that tends to be our focus as hospice nurses. We want to come in and make sure that these patients live to the full extent of the time that they have left.
Helping a person achieve comfort means addressing and relieving the symptoms of pain in its many forms.
That pain can be physical, and we know we have tools to address physical pain, medications, radiation for debulking tumors, even implantable devices that interrupt nerve pathways. But in hospice, I feel that we deal more often in the realm of emotional pain, existential pain probably being the biggest one, that loss of self, and also the anticipatory grief that comes along with it. That's experienced by both the patient and the family. Early on, working as a hospice nurse, you realize that the patient is not your only patient. The family, the friends, the neighbors, everyone is involved and everyone needs to be attended to.
Pain is personal. We know this. However, parts of a person's pain experience can be felt by others. Grief can be social pain that affects not just the patient, but also their families, friends, and loved ones. Pat continues to describe how hospice nurses approach the different types of pain that can occur.
We employ nursing care for the whole person, grief counselors for the existential pain and the anticipatory grief. We bring in social workers to assist with planning for after they die and how to secure support for the family. All of those things lessen the fear and the emotional pain they're dealing with so that they can maximize the living that they have to do in the time that they have left.
This comprehensive approach to care and pain management prepares the person in order to maximize their quality of life. But the acceptance of death is not easy and can't just be checked off of a list of things to do.
Many times we hear statements like, "I'm not afraid to die," which speaks more often to our cultural avoidance of addressing our mortality than the actual level of emotional distress. Many who make such claims come to a point where that pain of and the realization of their impending non-existence is a great big wall that they run right into.
The way a person lived, their cultural background, upbringing, status, all of these things can affect the way they view pain and death. In episode 3, pain expert Susan Dorsey talks about how the Old Order Amish, a group of traditionalist Christian church fellowships, are less likely to report when they are in pain because of their cultural background. Their sociocultural frame, being one of Stoicism, plays a part in their experience, expression, and acceptance of pain.
While I was in nursing school, we had a whole section on the cultural differences with which patients approach their care, how they deal with physical and emotional pain, death and dying.
Pat gives an example of how cultural differences can affect a person's pain experience. Please note that all names, personal information, and events have been omitted or changed to protect the privacy of individuals and their families.
One striking example, a 96-year-old fellow, Italian, came over years ago. He refused to take any medications despite his pain. And when I first came to meet him, he was stiff. He was stiff in discomfort in his bed. And I asked, when did he take his medicine last? And they said, testa d'ossa, which means hard head in Italian. And I may not be pronouncing it right. I never studied Italian. But I said, okay, look, you're going to have to take your medicine. And they translated, and he sort of shrugged and took it. And over time, I finally got him to take it. But in his mind, that was a weakness. Needing to take medicine was a weakness. And so I always think of testa d'ossa when someone refuses their medicine.
Testa d'ora, hard-headed. To the family members, this nickname provided a light way to cope with a difficult process. But for some, Accepting help for pain can be seen as a weakness. Death and dying, like pain, can be scary. So the tendency to want to avoid acknowledging it is natural. And as Pat mentioned earlier, managing physical pain for those in hospice is essential. But there are other factors that contribute to the overall pain experience. This can be emotional pain and even spiritual pain.
One other thing is spiritual pain, and we employ hospice chaplains. They coordinate with a patient's own spiritual leaders, and they can also be there to support the patient through their decline. One story that illustrates that spiritual pain for me was a woman, and one day I came to see her, and her daughter rushed out to the car and said, "Come in, my mom is not making sense." When I came in the house, she said, "Okay, everyone else, out the door. The priest is here. I need to talk to the priest." And I sort of was, "Oh, well, I'm your nurse." And she wasn't hearing any of it. She shooed out the rest of the family. And I sat down and said, "Well, what can I help you with? You know, we do have hospice chaplains." She said, "Oh, Father, I'm going to burn in hell. I can feel the flames." And I said, "Oh, my." And she said, "Oh, yes, I know. I'm horrible." And well, I didn't know what to do other than to say, "Are you really sorry for what you did?" And she said, "Oh, yes, yes." And I said, "Then I absolve you of your errors." And she visibly and physically relaxed, sort of woke up and said, "Oh, where's the family?" She was totally unaware. She was in such spiritual pain and distress. She doesn't even remember shooing them all out of the house.
We hear more from retired hospice nurse Pat Wisniewski about how addressing all of the complex parts of the pain experience can improve a person's quality of life when we return after this brief word about our sponsor.
Pain Pod is produced by Bloodstream Media and made possible thanks to our sponsor, Tremeau Pharmaceuticals.
Could be exactly apples to apples, same type of person, same type of pain, and they're experiencing it and perceiving it differently just because of their cultural background.
This is Chris Finale, Head of Business Operations at Tremeau.
I think that some patients, based on those backgrounds, may experience pain in a different way because they may not be feeling as understood.
Chris understands that social factors can affect a person's pain experience and access to care.
It's an annoyance. It's frustrating, so I don't like to even talk about it.
And like Chris, many people describe pain as an annoyance, something that they'd rather not deal with. So I asked Chris if he could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the way someone experiences pain, what would it be?
I'd probably say not having impact my quality of life or have it feel like it defines me.
Pain Pod listeners, if you've been listening to Season 3, then you already know. My name is Patrick James Lynch. I'm one of the producers, and I have severe hemophilia A. Chronic pain can be caused by many things, but if you're like me and have hemophilia, chances are some of your pain might be the result of what's called hemophilic arthropathy, or HA. Tremeau was founded with the goal of developing and delivering non-opioid pain therapies for people living with pain. Tremeau's RESET-HA study is a clinical research study for people who experience joint pain due to hemophilia. The study is evaluating an oral, non-opioid investigational drug designed to be taken once a day to see if it may potentially help relieve joint pain and improve physical function in people with hemophilic arthropathy, or HA. You may be eligible to participate in this clinical research study if you are between the ages of 12 and 75, have been diagnosed with hemophilia A or B, have chronic pain in one or more joints, and do not take opioid medication more than 4 days a week. If you are interested in learning more about taking part in Tremeau's RESET-HA study, visit resethastudy.com. That's RESETHASTUDY.com to find a study location near you. Reset the way you manage your pain. Visit resethastudy.com today.
How people react to pain. That every time you walked through a door, it was like starting over from first base.
How a person reacts to pain can be a good indicator of how much pain they are actually in. But how do we measure pain? As we discussed earlier in this season, measuring pain can be quite complex. But for some in palliative care, measuring pain can look a little different. Former hospice nurse Pat Wisniewski talks about how pain is measured for those at the end stages of life.
A large part of measuring pain from the outside is through obvious indicators. If they're grimacing, or if they have an exhibited reduction in mobility due to pain, things like that. But in the case of hospice, it seems that we really do rely much more on the patient's self-report and their subjective indicators of pain. So it really is highly subjective.
Susan Dorsey, pain expert and researcher from episode 3, agrees.
For the longest time, the nursing definition of pain is what the patient says it is.
And although this definition and measurement of pain has shifted and become more complex when it comes to quantifying pain for research purposes, the subjective measurement of pain and patient self-report is essential when a person is no longer seeking curative treatments. Pat expands upon key indicators in measuring pain in a hospice setting.
One of the key indicators can be that level of activity. If people are comfortable with what they're used to doing, you know they're not having a lot of problems. And one quick story there, one of the retirement homes that I worked in, there was a fellow, he spent his whole life with his family playing Scrabble. And they would play where if you could put a word over top of a word that was there before and both still made sense, you could play it. And so I would go and spend a couple hours and play Scrabble with him. And the first time I went in, he said, "No, I'm not up for Scrabble." I redoubled my efforts on finding out what was going on. And of course, he had an increase in pain. We got that covered. The next visit, we're back to Scrabble.
As we know, a key goal of hospice care is to reduce symptoms and increase a patient's comfort level as much as possible, and get them back to doing the things that bring joy and meaning to their lives, improving their overall quality of life. But illness and pain can sometimes have an effect on a person's identity. For those who are living out their final days, pain, in its many forms, can affect the way they perceive themselves.
Pain and the knowledge that someone is facing their demise definitely can affect a person's identity. I would say the answer, though, is yes and no. And I know that's an ambiguous answer, but let's see if I can explain what I mean. Yes, in that pain can be limiting, and that's why we do all that we can to rein it in. Maintaining control over the pain allows the patient to define themselves as who they are rather than becoming defined by their pain. And I would discuss this with my patients on how life is a process of constant redefinition.
Life is a process of constant redefinition. But how do you mentally process and practice this when you have an awareness that your days are limited?
One of the tools we utilize in dealing with existential pain, the emotional pain of those facing their death, are the 3 R's: review, reassurance, and reframing.
Review, reassurance, reframing.
In review, we encourage people to do life review, and that seems to allow them to do a self-assessment, to go toward meaning making, make sense of their life, and also define outstanding tasks that they feel they need to complete before they die.
Reviewing your life.
Reassurance, it's discussing concerns that their loved ones will be okay when they're gone.
Reassuring loved ones.
Reframing is helping patients to reframe their experience of and reaction to impending death. The thing that comes to mind is a death event. It's the one I always think of. I was on call late that night. It was early to mid-morning. I had a death pronouncement I had gone out to do. A funeral home came, and once the family was settled, I headed back home, and on the way I stopped in on a family whose grandfather was actively dying. He was barely conscious when I visited the previous evening, and I knew that his death was imminent. I advised the family to call the children and grandchildren, anyone who needed to say goodbye before he went. Well, I knocked softly at the door when I got there, and I let myself in, and the room was silent. There were 20 or so family members and friends sitting there, most wearing long faces, looking scared, which is understandable. No matter how well prepared we think we are, when death is imminent, it brings back all of those fears and emotions. And as I would say, it was a painful silence. Well, I asked how everyone was doing and mainly got a lot more shrugs and nods. No one really said anything. So my experience in hospice led me right into action. I thought, well, I need to remind them that one of the last faculties to leave a dying person is their hearing. So I asked, what kind of music had Kevin enjoyed? Well, the whole room erupted in raucous laughter. I sort of stumbled backwards toward the door. One son called out, I'll go get the whole stack. And another son said, I'll go grab the record player. And one of the sisters chimed in, if we're going to do this, I'm ordering the subs. Sub is what others know as a hoagie, hero, or Italian sandwich. Well, it turns out that Kevin was a collector of goofball, humorous 45 records. And every month at their family sandwich get-together, he would play them for the amusement of everyone present. Well, the whole family became greatly animated, and as the different tunes played, they regaled Kevin with their comments and singing along, and I left them as the party continued, and they, at least in that moment, were all feeling a little less of that emotional pain.
Reframing the way we view death. This can lessen fears and pains. Like the family above, through reframing, they were able to bring more comfort, joy, and life, even in death.
I was asked by someone once, why are you doing hospice work? Well, I started into nursing to be a midwife because I love being around that mystical moment of birth. But hospice is the same as birth. It's a life transition. And that transition from this life into wherever is next is just another mystical moment.
Addressing pain at the end stages of life is necessary, and not just the physical pain, but the emotional, the spiritual, the existential, and all of the other pains and fears that come with the knowledge of death. By looking at and addressing the overall pain experience, you provide comfort and bring back meaning and joy to a person. And this is what is meant by quality of life. No matter how many years, days, or minutes a person has left on this earth, reducing pain and improving their quality of life is essential, because
the more you live, the less you die.
Actually, leaders can be a resource in managing chronic pain in the workplace.
Tune in next time for our final episode of Season 3, where we discuss pain in the workplace and finally meet at that intersection where pain manifests. The Pain Podcast is written and hosted by me, Mel Forrest. Produced by Greg Holtzman. Edited by Colby Crow. Artwork by Ryan Geelan and Christina Newhard. Post-production support from Joshua Sterling Bragg, Rob Bradford, Allison Stoney, and Avra Friedman, and executive produced by Patrick James Lynch. The Pain Pod is produced by Bloodstream Media and presented by Tremeau Pharmaceuticals. Tremeau's RESET-HA study is a clinical research study for people who experience joint pain due to hemophilia, and you can learn more about it by visiting resethastudy.com. And as always, if you like this episode, make sure to subscribe, rate, and share the Pain Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Mel Forrest, and we'll be back next time with episode 8 of the Pain Podcast.